Hey, come here. If you ever ingest poison and you need to get it out of you in a hurry, I strongly recommend you watch Nicolas Cage in Indianapolis, Men of Courage. Have a bucket with you. A big bucket. I'll tell you why in a sec. Hi, and welcome to my list of top 10 nautical films. Nautical films. Movies, even. My favourites. And why, you're probably wondering, why start with a reference to a crap film? Well, if you're ever calibrating an industrial instrument, you'd always set the 0 first. Then you adjust your span. So that's what I'm doing. Indianapolis, Men of Courage is a useless movie. I couldn't believe how bad it was. It starts off with a ridiculous scene where the ship is surrounded by Japanese planes attacking it. All the anti-aircraft guns are firing away, and the captain, Nicolas Cage, is on the bridge, and he's doing this.
11 o'clock! 11 o'clock! Fire! Fire! Fire party to the bow! 12 o'clock! 12 o'clock! 12 o'clock! Fire!
He's giving instructions to somebody, God knows who. 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Now, if you know anything about ships, you know people on a bridge of a ship will give instructions in compass points or degrees. God knows how they made that film with a budget of 40 million and an advisor from the Navy. He must have been off that day. I can imagine him sitting in the premiere seeing that scene and thinking of all his mates who he told he was going to be on this film as an advisor, and all his mates from the Navy are going to see that and go, what? Anyway, the film doesn't get much better after that. They shoehorn in a bit of a love triangle, a race thing. It's also awkward and cack-handed, and the film is filmed on a stationary museum exhibit battleship which shows, and it's a poor attempt at a film, and it doesn't honour the memory of the real men. It was a real incident. That ship, the Indianapolis, went down. It was terrible what happened. Real men died horribly, attacked by sharks. The best cinematic reference to that is still going to be Quint in Jaws, when he tells the lads about his experiences as a survivor of the Indianapolis in the water with the sharks.
Very first light, Chief. Sharks come cruising. So we formed ourselves into tight groups. You know, it's kind of like old squares in a battle, like you see in a calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was shark comes to the nearest man, that man he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you, right into your eyes. You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
So now, on to the good movies. My top 10 favourite nautical films. And by an amazing coincidence, number 10 is Jaws. Now, Jaws was made in 1975. It was on foot of a Peter Benchley novel that was a big hit. And a few changes were made, but it was Spielberg's first big breakthrough movie where it was a summer blockbuster, and probably the first summer blockbuster. I think it's widely regarded as being the one that set this trend where you had to have a big blockbuster in the summer. 1975, Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw, Roy Schneider, and you might not have thought of it as a nautical film, but it involves the sea. It's all around the sea, and a big part of the movie is the three lads on the boat trying to hunt down the shark. And it's a very interesting character study then between Quint, the old shark hunter, Richard Dreyfuss, the scientist, the new age guy, compared to the old hard-bitten, womanizing, hard-drinking Robert Shaw. And then in the middle, trying to keep the peace, is Roy Schneider as the captain, the police captain, who's trying to save the day by getting the shark, even though he's got no nautical experience himself. So it's a great film. I really like it. And when you think of what Spielberg did afterwards, look at the characters and the realism, the gritty realism in that movie, and imagine how Jurassic Park might have been if all the characters were actually real characters like in Jaws, instead of cardboard cutouts. The nerd, the hunter. Might compare those people with the characters he had in Jaws. I reckon his career really kind of peaked with Jaws, and he's been trying to catch up since. Anyway, that's just me. That's Jaws.
Jar a monkey cage.
Anti-shark cage.
Anti-shark cage. You go inside the cage. Cage goes in the water. You go in the water. Shark's in the water. Our shark. Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu, you ladies of Spain. For we've received orders for to sail back to Boston. And so never more shall we see you again.
The Enemy Below from 1957 is a World War II movie starring Kurt Jurgens and Robert Mitchum. It's based on a book written in 1956 by Dennis Rayner, a Royal Navy officer who had served in convoys in the North Atlantic. And this film, the book was about a Royal Naval vessel in a duel with a U-boat, basically one-on-one. And which never probably actually happened, but still made a good book. And the novel, when they filmed it, they made it an American destroyer. But look, it's a good film. It's filmed in Technicolor, looks good. It's very focused on the cat and mouse, the battle of wits between Kurt Jurgens, the German submarine commander, and Robert Mitchum, the destroyer commander.
45 degrees, Captain.
All engines stop.
All engines stop.
All engines stop, sir.
You, think it might be a U-boat, sir?
Wiggling like one. He may take the bait.
Level.
The action is tense, and the acting is good. Kurt Jurgens is an interesting guy. He was an actor in Germany. He was very critical of anti-socialism, of National Socialism, and he then ended up being interned by the Nazis. This was his first big Hollywood breakthrough, and after that he popped up all over the place in war movies, and both Robert Mitchum and himself played in The Longest Day, although not together. So that's it. The Enemy Below. Good, workmanlike, well made, good looking nautical film. If you've seen my list of top 10 nautical novels, you'll know I like the novel The Sand Pebbles by Richard Baker, who was in the US Navy, served on gunboat up the Yangtze River in the 30s. This novel is set in the 20s when China is undergoing a lot of changes. It involves the crew of this riverboat, and particularly Jake Holman, the engineer, who's played by Steve McQueen. His best friend on board is played by Richard Attenborough, plays a sailor who gets involved with a Chinese woman. So the whole thing is set among the turmoil of those changing times, and China is finding its feet, and the things are changing. I wonder, is it a coincidence that the film was made during America's involvement in Vietnam? It's a good film, and it's different. It's one of those films that you couldn't really compare it with any other, because it's quite a unique setting. Looks great, filmed very well. Obviously, most of it's on location. Steve McQueen steams the seals he's in with just his body language as usual. And Richard Crenna plays the captain. One of the quirky little details you might notice, Steve McQueen, when he's on shore leave, chatting up Candice Bergen, you'll notice the American Navy had a tradition called Liberty Cuffs. In the old days, sailors would have whittled scrimshaw and things in their spare time. In the American Navy at that time, they were allowed, well, strictly speaking, it was a breach of regulations, but it was tolerated. On the inside of their cuffs, they would do embroidery. And then when they were ashore in a bar or something, they'd unbutton the cuffs and roll them up and show off their handiwork. I'm not sure if that still exists or if any other navies do that or did that, but just watch out for it if you ever watch the movie. The Sand Pebbles. A film from 1966. Dead Calm. Dead Calm is a film based on a 1963 novel by Charles Williams. Now, Orson Welles, believe it or not, was involved in a project to film this, but he never got it finished. It's a film made by the Australian George Miller, who's behind the Mad Max movies. He was involved in producing it. Not much of a cast, small cast, but very good cast. Billy Zane is Billy Zane. We have Sam Neill, who's always watchable, always reliable, and we have a very young and beautiful and fresh and gorgeous looking Nicole Kidman. They basically, Sam Neill and Nicole Kidman, play a couple who are on a Pacific voyage on a yacht, and they encounter a vessel that is in trouble, taking water. Billy Zane's on board, and after that it becomes a suspenseful psychological thriller, but all on the water between the two vessels. I don't want to give away any spoilers. It was directed by Philip Noyce, who went on to break into Hollywood after making this film, and did some of those movies based on Tom Clancy novels. But his next film apparently is going to be based on the Siege of Tobruk, which should be interesting. But Dead Calm is a great nautical film, great thriller. Yeah, I like it.
No. Please continue. I'm always available to hear complaints.
Well, Captain, sir, we've come representing the whole crew. It's about the half ration, sir. And they ain't right, sir. I'd like to the crew would like to remind you, sir, what it says in the regulations.
You dare to quote the regulations to me?
The regulations was made to go by, sir.
We don't mean no impertinence, sir.
Now, who doesn't like a good mutiny? The Mutiny on the Bounty occurred in 1789, and it's been filmed several times since. First filmed by the Australians in 1916. Then it was filmed by the New Zealand co-production with Australia and New Zealand, and it was a kind of a dramatised documentary, the documentary parts to it, but also dramatised parts in which Errol Flynn played Fletcher Christian. And then that was 1933. In 35, 2 years later, it was a big Hollywood production, and that starred Charles Lawton as Captain Bligh and Clark Gable as Fletcher Christian.
Voyage of the Bounty.
Further on then, in the 60s, 1962, we had Marlon Brando playing Fletcher Christian, and the Captain Bligh part was played by Trevor Howard. And in 1984, it was made again, Mel Gibson playing Fletcher Christian, and Anthony Hopkins playing Captain Bligh. There's even been a Bugs Bunny version of it, with Bugs Bunny playing Fletcher Christian and Yosemite Sam playing Captain Bligh. And there's been an episode of The Simpsons, of course, based on it, with Principal Skinner playing Captain Bligh. But I'm going to talk to you about the two movies that were made, big Technicolor productions. 1962's version with Clark Gable, with Marlon Brando, and 1984's version with Mel Gibson, because I couldn't put two Bounty movies on the list, and I like both of those films. It's a toss-up which to pick. The 1935 black and white Charles Lawton Clark Gable movie, that won Best Picture Oscar, and 3 people from the cast were nominated as Best Actor for the Oscars. In fact, that resulted in the Oscars introducing a new category of Best Supporting Role, because one of the midshipmen was the third person who was nominated. 1962, the version was big, looks great. Marlon Brando got a bit of stick for his accent, the voice he affected for the film, and it didn't do well financially. But they actually built a ship for it. They built a replica of the ship for the movie. Now, sadly, that replica was lost in 2012 when there was a Hurricane Sandy approaching the eastern seaboard of the US, and they went to sea to try and ride out the hurricane and failed. It was a bit of a rash decision, I guess, but they probably thought they'd do better. The captain was one of the people lost. The other person lost was a crew member, a female person whose name escapes me, but her surname was Christian, and she was related to Fletcher Christian, ironically. 1984, I believe they also built a vessel for the Bounty in 1984. That project in 1984 was originally going to be directed by David Lean. He started that whole ball rolling, and it looked like before Mel Gibson was chosen, they were thinking of using Christopher Reeve. But it ended up with Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson in a far more nuanced version of the story. Neither of those two guys is black and white.
Sir, I'm commander! By law! I am the first! Do you understand? God damn your hide!
Anthony Hopkins was seen to be troubled, but so was Fletcher Christian.
Think of my wife! I am in hell! Hell, sir!
Who was from the Isle of Man, believe it or not. And so it's a bit of revisionist, that film. Again, it looks great, all filmed out on location in South Sea Islands, as was the 1962 version. In the 1962 version, Marlon Brando fell for the actress playing the princess, Polynesian princess, ended up marrying her, believe it or not. So it was a toss-up between each of those two movies. I really like both of them, and I will choose. I haven't chosen before I sat down here now, so I'm going to pick the 1962 one, because it's probably going to be overlooked a bit after the other one, and it's well worth a look. So I'm going for a 1962 Mutiny on the Bounty. That's it.
1943 and 1941, the war had just begun. The Germans had the biggest ship that had the biggest guns. The Bismarck was the fastest ship that ever sailed the seas. On the decks were guns as big as steers and shells as big as trees.
Believe it or not, that was the Blues Brothers singing Sink the Bismarck. I didn't know the song existed. I didn't know the Blues Brothers sang it. The internet hasn't lost its power to surprise. Now, Sink the Bismarck was a 1960 film directed by Lewis Gilbert, who went on to direct Shirley Valentine, Alfie, Educating Rita, films like that, and he also pops up actually later in this list. Black and white film recounting true events in a semi-fictionalized form revolving around Kenneth Moore, who's a land-based officer trying to coordinate the search for the Bismarck. Bismarck and Prince Eugen have left Germany, heading into the Atlantic in the middle of World War II. Nobody knows where they are. So the Hood and the Prince of Wales are part of the various vessels sent out to try and find the Bismarck. The Hood, Britain's most famous battle cruiser of the time. It was the biggest ship they had for years, going around the world showing the flag. And the Bismarck, Germany's brand new battleship. When they met, Bismarck sank the Hood, to everybody's dismay and consternation. And Churchill issued an order to the Royal Navy to basically drop what they were doing and sink the Bismarck. Hence the title of the movie, and that's what ensued then. The Royal Navy did everything in their power to get the Bismarck, and the Bismarck was trying to make it to a safe port in France.
Captain speaking. Bismarck has been sighted in Denmark Strait. She's on her way out into the Atlantic, and we plan to tackle her about dawn tomorrow morning. You will be going to action station shortly after midnight, so get all the rest you can before then. I'm confident tomorrow is going to be a big day for us. Good luck, and good shooting.
4:20. Fire when the sights come on.
2 enemy destroyers on port bow, sir.
Alarm port. Alarm port, sir.
Very good film. Good, almost documentary feel to it. Well worth a look. If you haven't seen it, you should. That's it. 1960. Sink the Bismarck. You have to have the exclamation mark. Next up is HMS Defiant. Now, you've probably never heard of this film. Alec Guinness and Dirk Bogarde. Alec Guinness plays the captain. Dirk Bogarde plays the first officer. It's a film set in 1797 against the backdrop of the French Revolutionary Wars and the Great Mutiny in the Nore and Spithead fleets, Great British Mutiny of sailors that has been practically written out of history.
Are you questioning my method, sir?
I haven't said so. I know the value of discipline as well as you do.
Discipline is all that matters, sir.
It's never all that matters, Mr. Scott Paget, but it can exist even rigidly in a happy ship.
The ideal is always possible, sir, if the men cooperate.
It was a toss-up between including this or Horatio Hornblower. I wanted one of those films in this list, and I just couldn't get past Gregory Peck's accent in that film. It's a good film, nice big Hollywood treatment of the Hornblower books, but Gregory Peck just doesn't do it.
Captain, you are joking.
I've never been more serious in my life.
He just doesn't carry across as a Royal Navy officer. He's too American, unfortunately. But HMS Defiant, directed by Lewis Gilbert, who I mentioned earlier. It's very well made, great battle scenes based on what they had at the time. They did really well.
Aim for a mast! Fire!
and also there's some beautiful shots that look like a painting. So HMS Defiant, known in the States as Damn the Defiant. There you go. Sebastian Junger wrote a book based on the events of 1991. He called it The Perfect Storm, and it was filmed with a great cast. They took some liberties with the story, but it's basically about the events off the east coast of the US in 1991, when a series of storms combined to create a unique meteorological event which has been termed the perfect storm, a phrase that has basically become part of the English language now, for meaning when things combine to produce something far worse than normal. George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, John C. Reilly, Diane Lane. The story evolves around a trawler, the Andrea Gale from Gloucester, and also there's a yacht involved, and they're all caught up in this really bad storm. On board the trawler, where most of the action takes place, working class American fishermen. The captain who owns the boat is under pressure to make money, to find fish, and to stay out. The lads below are just working class lads, and they get caught up in this storm, and whatever can go wrong does go wrong for them. The Coast Guard, the US Coast Guard and the Air National Guard feature prominently, because these guys risk their lives and work wonders to save people, and so they are doing their best in this storm to try and save both the crew of the yacht and these fishermen. Fantastically filmed. There's not much more to say about it. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a look. It really is. It does show you how things can go wrong at sea and how bad the weather can be. It's filmed by Wolfgang Petersen, who made Das Boot. And by the way, let me just say, I have no submarine movies on this list, because I hope to do a list entirely of submarine movies, the top 10 submarine movies. So I made a conscious decision to keep this to stuff on the surface, this list. I should have made that clear at the start. My apologies for that. Okay, onwards. The Cruel Sea. It's based on a book by Nicholas Montserrat. It's filmed in 1953 by director Charles Friend, who didn't really make anything else that stands out. Starring Jack Hawkins, Donald Sinden, and Denham Elliott. Lots of other familiar faces in the background. A lot of movies, a lot of war movies made around that time, and you'd see a lot of faces in the background. A lot of them, similar faces. I can't remember, is Gordon Jackson in it? But I bet he is. That kind of thing. The film revolves around the Battle of the Atlantic, and involves HMS Compass Rose and all the events that befall her and the crew, and another ship later on. So it's really a good telling of what life was about for people on North Atlantic convoy duty, that kind of thing.
Bearing 225, sir.
Echo bearing 225, moving
Starboard 10. Starboard 10, sir.
Steer 220.
There's not a lot more to say about it. It's just good film, good solid film with powerful performances.
You all right?
No. I don't mind telling you. I'm not.
One of the more humorous aspects of it is Donald Sinden was later telling how he has no positive buoyancy, unlike other people. So when they were filming a scene where they had to go in the water, they all jumped in the water, despite him having warned people he couldn't swim. They realised afterwards he hadn't come back up. Jack Hawkins had to dive in and rescue him. And when they were filming swimming, they had to swim past the camera, and the line of them went past the camera, but there was a gap where he was supposed to be, so they filmed it again, and he was missing. what was happening was he was swimming, but he was below the surface of the water, so they had to get him to lie on a stuntman's back and swim past to complete the shot. It's a good film. It could stand in, I suppose, for a lot of British naval war films. It could represent them, is what I mean, although it's head and shoulders above them, above most of them. But there was a lot of good films made then. So that is A Cruel Sea.
And so we went to war again, and to the bitterest sector of it, the convoy routes to North Russia.
Number 1. Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. Now the subtitle is important because this film is based on the writings of Patrick O'Brian, whose first book about Captain Aubrey and Stephen Maturin the Doctor is called Master and Commander. But in that book the two of them meet, and none of the events of this film are related to that book. Master and Commander is the first of a series of about 22 books, I think, and Far Side of the World is one of those books, and it involves a chase of an American vessel. In this film it's French. So it's a very good capture of the world of Patrick O'Brian. What it does really well is captures the sense of community on board the ship.
He who would pun would pick a pocket.
The actors are very good. Russell Crowe seems to be enjoying himself. Paul Bettany plays the Doctor, Stephen Maturin. There's a host of other character actors on board and some young midshipmen. They all do their job really, really well. It's a fabulous film. Believe it or not, it was nominated for 10 Oscars, even though a lot of people have kind of forgotten about it. It only won 2 technical Oscars for cinematography and editing. But if you know anything about sailing and the sea, or you like stuff like that, I'm sure you probably agree with my choice of making this number 1. It was filmed in America. They had massive models built on gimbals in water tanks, and they had a ship to work with as well, of course. I have been reliably informed that the shot of Cape Horn from the deck of the ship was actually filmed from the deck of the Endeavour replica as she went round Cape Horn. The filming on the Galapagos did take place on the Galapagos. Normally only documentaries are allowed film. There was a big deal for them to be able to film a drama on the Galapagos Islands. It's quite a unique film. There's some great moments in it. One of the standouts for me is when the captain is trying to put some steel into the backbone of the junior officer who's losing respect of the men, who's not liked, Russell Crowe tries to give him a bit of a pep talk, and the guy in his response assures Russell Crowe that he'll be different and he'll change, but you can tell in Russell Crowe's face that he knows he's wasting his time. There's another good moment when one of the midshipmen is badly wounded and loses an arm, and Russell Crowe visits him in the sick bay and gives him a book about the life of Nelson. On the cover, Nelson is shown with his arm pinned, his empty sleeve pinned. It's not commented on. It's just something that you'd notice if you notice the cover, and is that the hint he was giving is nice and subtle. It's the kind of thing you'd miss if you were watching this film with a phone in your hand. And yes, my son, I'm talking to you. Okay, so anyway, Master and Commander, Far Side of the World, as far as I'm aware, the best nautical movie out there. Now I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you might have found something that you found interesting that you might chase up and look at. If I was to make this list again a week from now, there might be something different on it. I might lose a few, gain a few, who knows. But anyway, goodbye. Thanks for staying this long if you watched the whole thing. See ya.